with an interesting new take on a very old problem.
You've got to get on the phone and take the money out of your pocket. Don't go to the pub tonight, please. Stay in and give us the money. There are people dying now, so give me the money.
Appalled by the seeming indifference of the developed world, Bob Geldof and a group of celebrities got together to raise money for Africa.
The whole day down, 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 shoot it all down.
The result, of course, was the global broadcast phenomenon called Live Aid. The concerts raised millions of dollars from ordinary people around the world and marked the beginning of a new era of celebrity saviours who've been growing in authority, number and influence ever since. Enter African economist and author Dambisa Moyo, billed as the anti-Bono and with a provocative book called Dead Aid, a stinging critique of the so-called glamour aid. Moyo argues aid is not a solution, it's the problem.
I don't agree with the message. Fundamentally, I don't think Africa needs more aid. I think it needs less aid. It needs governments to be made accountable to the domestic citizenry and not accountable to donors. Africans stand in the hot African sun to elect their leaders. And it's those leaders who are charged with the responsibility of delivering social services and being accountable to their people. There clearly was a vacuum that has allowed the celebrity culture to seep in, but it would seem to me that no society would appreciate their whole policy and the future of their children to be dependent on celebrities that actually don't live in these contexts.
In 2005, Live Aid had become Live 8, and the frontrunners, the now Sir Bob Geldof and Bono, were taking their message directly to world leaders. But for Dambisa Moyo, the rise of glamour aid is only part of the problem. She's also railing against what she describes as the self-perpetuating aid industry.
Basically, aid has become an industry. There are just way too many vested interests, and by and large, the criticisms that my book has been receiving are coming from those quarters, people who actually have a vested interest to see the continuous cycle of Africa in despair so that they can justify their existence.
What sort of people are you talking about?
I'm talking about academics. I'm talking about people from the NGO community. I'm talking about people who are policymakers and politicians who know that it doesn't work. The evidence has shown it doesn't work. In 1970, 10% of Africans lived in poverty. It's now more like 70%. In many countries, as high as 85% of Africans are living in poverty at a time when the aid model has become so dominant.
What's the solution?
In the book, I actually prescribe that they should, with immediate effect, or in the very near foreseeable future, implement a 5-year plan where they systematically reduce aid to these countries. I would say that things like the capital markets are an easy way for countries to start to fund themselves. So, in the worst case scenario, governments in Africa should focus on getting ratings. They should be focusing on learning how to pitch to international investors so that when the markets do come back, which they invariably will, they'll be ready to raise money in the capital markets. But on the other hand, right now there are non-traditional markets such as China and the Middle East where money does exist, and African governments should be talking to these places about issuing bonds and raising capital that way.
As we've just seen in Zimbabwe, there is a desperate need for humanitarian aid. In response to the new power-sharing deal there, Australia's just committed $10 million to fight cholera and encourage medical professionals to come back and help. Beyond the humanitarian question, though, Dambisa Moyo claims the enduring problem is the scale of government-to-government aid, the large systemic cash transfers from rich countries to Africa. Huge amounts of money squandered by the likes of Mugabe.
In the book, I talk about the fact that the Zimbabwean government received from the United Kingdom and the United States around $300 million as late as 2006. And I think that's worrying. I think that's a big concern. The fact that Mugabe can and does come to Europe and the United States. I was just in New York last September, and he was attending the UN meetings. And the fact that the UK and the United States maintain diplomatic ties with Zimbabwe leaves the African on the ground wondering what options they have to bring their governments to accountability.
I suspect many people watching this program would say the problem's not aid, it's corrupt leaders.
Right. I don't think you can delink the two in the African context. I think an aid model makes good leaders bad and makes bad leaders worse. It's free money. There are no strings attached. Even in the times when multilateral institutions and donors have talked about conditionalities, those conditionalities are weak. They are not applied, again, because the aid industry, it thrives and feeds on Africans borrowing money. And so the cycle keeps going on.
Does it make you angry when you look at the amount of money that's been spent in Africa over the past 20, 30 years?
Well, I think it's absurd. In 1 year of a problem in the capitalist system, and we are so critical of capitalism, 60 years of an aid-dependent model, and we hear only calls for more aid. That to me is intellectual dishonesty, particularly from the quarters of people who I know for a fact have been big proponents of capitalism in other regions of the world. But when it comes to Africa, they're big supporters of aid. I think
Why? What, is there a blind spot there? Or why particularly Africa?
To be quite honest, I think it's built in pity. I think the whole aid model emanates from a pity for Africa, a sense that Africa cannot do it, cannot achieve growth. And sadly, because there are incentives, which, as you know, the world has shown, people, governments, companies respond to incentives. There are incentives for African governments to take aid. We've basically ended up in a situation where it doesn't work, and we're happy to just keep it going.
And you're absolutely confident that removing that aid is not going to leave at least some people without food, without medicine?
I think the ones that will be affected most will probably be the African elite, as opposed to the broader population.
What will they lose?
I think they would lose possibly their bank accounts in Geneva and the worst case scenario. But I think beyond that, I think that they would also lose the ability to have leisure time, and they'll be required to actually go out and start to work hard to find money to support their social programs in Africa.
What would you say, though, to the well-meaning Australian who donates to the charity, who urges the Australian government, for example, to lift its game with aid? And what would you say to those people?
I would say it's very important to understand what that type of aid can and cannot do. It can provide a Band-Aid solution. So we've talked about humanitarian aid as one example of that, but it cannot deliver long-term growth that would ensure Africa to stand on its own 2 feet and become an equal partner on the global stage. So to give you an example, yes, you might help fund a scholarship for a girl to go to school, but when she's done with her education, the fact that aid is so pernicious and so damaging to an economy means that the economy has not grown, that girl that you've helped sponsor will not find a job in her economy.
If you cut off aid within 5 years, surely that's going to leave millions of people without the support they are now dependent on. Food aid, medical aid that really keeps people alive.
I don't believe that's the case. Most Africans do not see any of the aid that you are alluding to. It's, again, their best case scenario in some projects is 20 cents on the dollar that actually makes it to an African. And that's best case. Effectively, if we continue down this path, we will have many more Africans living in poverty in few years to come. And that is really the problem, that there are no jobs coming out of an aid model.
And with the market reforms that you would advocate in that system, under that system, if it's widely adopted, what vision do you have of Africa?
The vision I have is basically one that looks like what's happened in the rest of the world when they've adopted those models. Growth rates that could get up to double digits, as we've seen in China and India and so on, and also much more participation by the broader African society, not only in terms of economic participation and entrepreneurship, but also in terms of political participation and ensuring that their governments are held accountable to deliver those services.
Let's hope you're right. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much. And I am right.
Good stuff. I think she's from West Africa, right? But she has, with parts of her accent, you can hear the Caribbean kind of thing going on there. With that said, man, let me start with Black Steel on this one. Is aid killing Africa? By the economist Dambisa Moyo, as requested. What say you, Black Steel?
I mean, the amount of aid that is received by Africa dwarfs the amount of things that are taken out of Africa. So the money that is taken out of Africa, the resources that are taken out of Africa, is far greater than the amount of aid that is received. All right. That's one thing I want to say. Yeah, I think that because they give the aid, right, as a way to kind of show, oh, we're really trying to help these people. But then they always leave out the fact how they try to undermine and destroy African governments, especially those that are sovereign. Look what's going on in Burkina Faso, how they attack the people, how trying to overthrow Traore. Look how they did Thomas Sankara. Look, all these African leaders have been assassinated and taken off the board whenever they try to stand up for their people or do the right thing, take control of their resources, or have the resources benefit the people and not just themselves. The only African leaders that are kept in power are those that do the dictates of the West. So she's absolutely correct. We don't need aid. What you need to do is leave us alone. Right? If they left us alone, Africa could develop the way it's supposed to develop. But because they won't leave us alone, and they undermine the process of African leaders, this is going to be a consistent pattern. So she's absolutely right, and I think that many Africans understand that the aid that is being offered is so detrimental to us. But then look what happened in Kenya, and when I don't know which African nation was that they tried to put on this austerity and have private organizations take control over the public sector, and it led to increase in prices, and people just couldn't afford to live. So that happens all the time. So it's not aid that we need. We need to be left alone, and we need to allow ourselves to be able to develop as people. And that's something they've never allowed African people to do. We've been under constant attack, so from at least since the Conference of Berlin. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Black. Still did so. What's the All right, I guess did so busy.
Hold on.
Did so, can you hear us?
There we go. I was trying to mute. Sorry. Okay, so I feel her and having an interesting conversation in regards to this, because her book was published back on 2009, and we met in the United Nations. I mean, she used to work with the World Bank. Before that, if I'm not incorrect, she worked for the FMAE, or the International Monetary Fund, IMF. I can understand her points, but unfortunately, my criticism would be as follows. One, she makes extremely widely overbearing absolute takes on this. Dambisa, even if we can agree that from the end of the war, Second World War, on the process of independence of Africa to the establishment of sovereign nations in Africa during the end of the war up to today, there are several factors that clearly impact development within Africa. Major one, the impacts of colonialism and the remnants of that colonialism, even through the process of becoming sovereign nations. That's a fact. Second fact, now colonialism and the impacts of how the Berlin and how the separation of the divisions of Africa by the Europeans created worsening social conditions in that sense that even carried on after the process of independence in Africa. the issue with aid is that you have elements that also are impacted into this whole thing I was saying, which is internal corruption. There's no doubt that aid has been utilized to feed the pockets of the few and not benefit the people that are intentioned to be benefited with that particular aid. And third of all is that even if we can say that Africa has had leaders in occasions that just wanted to do the right thing, they also had leaders that did the wrong thing over and over and over again, making issues of progress even worse. So if we add the impacts of colonialism, the remnants of that colonialism, the internal strife against traders who use the things that should be for everybody just to benefit themselves, and the problems that creates towards development, then Moyo's argument becomes mute. Because the problem isn't aid, the problem is a whole series of shitty factors that play a role into this whole thing. And that aid and the issue of aid is just one of those factors, but not the factor. So the problem is, and I do have to correct you, she's a born and raised woman from Lusaka in Zambia. She has no Caribbean whatsoever in her. She has English, mainly English, and if I'm not incorrect, she's a PhD in economics from the Oxford University and a master's degree from Harvard University, John F. Kennedy School of Government. So going back to the point the sister was making, she's a prime example of a Black person who has taken to heart of the education of the white man. And what she's doing is she's repeating the white man's talking points. She's just another mouthpiece for the white man. And she doesn't even realize it.
Appreciate that, so no, I wasn't saying she was. I wasn't saying that she was of Caribbean descent. I was more so making a comment as to the connection of the Caribbean accent and the African tongue. With that said, though, let me hear from Jacadero on this.
Yeah, is aid killing Africa? Yeah. I mean, anywhere that there's NGOs, it's usually you just follow the money, and there's a CEO that's driving a Range Rover. Ask me how I know. So for those that don't know, a son of Kenyan parents, and so when I went back to Kenya, my mom is from Kibera, Nairobi, number 8, because of the Matatu stop is number 8. But anyways, nonetheless, Kibera is one of the largest slums in East Africa. The largest slum in Kenya, and there's so many NGOs. NGOs, for those that don't know, it's non-governmental organizations. In the U.S., we call it nonprofits. But there's so many NGOs in Kibera, so many. And Kibra's been existing as it is, being a slum, since I don't know how long. Some people in Nairobi call Kibera motherland because they say that when you come from Kibera, or Kibra, as I call it, it's not only you're from there, your mom's from there, your grandfather's from there, and the grandfather before that was from there. And so it's like, if all this NGO money has been flooded into this one slum, what's it been doing? Where has this been going? Where is the progress report? Who's taking care of this? Why aren't we getting issues solved? And yeah, just follow the money. Is aid killing Africa? Absolutely. And I can tell you that on a micro level. You know, I see that. I can see that. I can go and actually show you that. So yeah, my trip back home, it was eye-opening for a lot of reasons, because when there would be certain events that would happen in downtown Nairobi, you could easily just take maybe a 2-minute Lyft ride. And now there's a neighborhood where every other driveway has an Audi or BMW. And then we have the largest slum in East Africa, literally 2 minutes away. How does this make any sense? How is it that this is a country where 40% live below the poverty line, but yet we have certain events where, bro, VIP is like flooded with Jameson, Johnny Walker, the best hookah that you can smoke? Huh? Does that make any sense? It doesn't make any sense. When you open your eyes in a particular African country, and again, I go with my parents' country like Kenya, you start to ask so many questions like, how is this working? How does this country work? How does this country work? Let's go to a neighboring country like South Sudan, where my stepfather's from. When the U.S., before the United States team faced South Sudan's Olympic team last year. Was it last year? I think it was last year. Before that, one of the players for the South Sudanese team said, hey, we don't have an indoor facility. They didn't have an indoor facility in South Sudan for the basketball players. That country has been around for 14 years, and they don't have an indoor facility, but yet their president, Salva Kiir, is worth $14 billion. And the current vice president that replaced the vice president that was put on house arrest in March of this year was accused back in 2017 of stealing a $7 billion construction project. A $7 billion construction project. Where is this money going? What are we doing with this money? What is going on? Yes, aid money is killing Africa, but also what else is killing Africa is we do not take our leaders and hold them accountable. Nepal has done one hell of a job. I cannot say enough to the Nepalese. Shout out to the Nepalese Gen Z. Woo! To take out your minister of finance and drag him to the river and beat him since. Let's fucking go. And yes, to answer your question, RBG, Real Black Gentleman, $7 billion. He was accused of embezzling. And who did the research for that? The Trump administration. You can do your research. His name is Bola Mel, the current vice president of South Sudan. $7 billion. That's why he's under international sanctions. That's why. That's why. That's currently why they don't want him to become the president of South Sudan, is because he's on international sanctions from the U.S., because it was the U.S. that gave him that $7 billion to have a construction project. Because again, this country has only been around for 14 years. Again, back to my thing with Nepal. Good job, Nepalese. If any Nepalese are hearing this, good job. Africans. Of course, my Gen Z of Kenya, we you know what? I don't want to say too much because I may be taking a trip to Kenya soon. But yes, is aid killing Africa? Absolutely. Good job, Nepalese.
Good stuff there, Jacadero. Let's all welcome an MG2 this week. MG2, how are you?
Doing great. Oh, I'm loving this conversation. My goodness. I love to hear young brothers, because most of you, if not all of you, are much younger than I. And I just love to hear, just the commentary, because it makes me learn. And I'm glad the previous brother brought up Nepal. I should hope that those Gen Z Nepalese don't limit their angst to their so-called government and actually go to their military and others. Because I don't know if anyone, maybe you guys are too young, but last I remember about Nepal was how they emptied their toilets, courtesy of the UN, into Haitian waters, killing tens of thousands of Haitians. So hopefully they didn't just limit their angst to the government. Hopefully they got, a little bit get back of those that killed a lot of our Haitian brothers and sisters circa 2010 in that earthquake. One of the things that in terms of aid destroying Africa, and you guys give me some really good points and a lot of things to ponder. I ask myself, and I'm going back to the 60s in terms of when they first started putting together so-called aid for Africa, because Africans were going through decolonization, and I remember that very well. The thing I have to ask myself is, what has aid done? Okay, in terms of a past, I have to ask myself, what are the effects of so-called quote unquote aid right now? And what's going on, especially with NGOs and these other, insidious so-called organizations. Then I have to ask, where has the effects of this aid in terms of allowing Africans to not ever have to have aid again? In other words, to become sovereign. You use something, it's either a weapon, a lesson, or a tool, or you throw it out. And I ask, has it been used, with those who are quote unquote in power to basically wean yourself off to where you don't have to ever ask or need so-called aid again? And, I had to ask myself because, and I'm glad the previous brothers brought up the so-called leaders. Now, these are not leaders. Dr. John Henrik Clarke, as we all know, has said the leader is one closest to the enemy in pursuit. So clearly there is no leadership. They're heads of state maybe, but not leaders. When you have African so-called heads of state that have to go to other countries to heal themselves in their dying, days, clearly they have not taught their populace how to heal. So, you're there to teach, or at least to inspire, or at least to wean yourself off of other being dependent on somebody to heal you, because you have your own doctors that you've brought up in your society. So clearly, and that's not just an African leader fault, that's African people overall. Now I have to go ahead and extend this. Is aid bad for Africans? I have to extend this to the entire Black race, to the entire African race, not just on the continent, not just Caribbean. I'm talking Black folks all over the planet. And the reason I have to do that is I have to ask myself, the intentions of this so-called aid, because no one will give you something without something that they will get more from you, as one of your previous guests brought up, of all the resources they're taking. And it's not just in the African country, this is overall. We're talking hip hop industry in the United States. We're talking so-called those that were in the United States as military. I don't care where you are, so-called preachers. It does not matter. Somebody's going to give you a poison pill, or as D'Angelo said in the song, the devil's pie, because they know they're going to get more. As a trader in markets, that's the first thing that I learned. It's called pot odds. It's called, it's the juice worth the squeeze. If I'm going to put something out there, I want to make sure I get at least 1.4 to 1.5% as a ratio above what I've given. So if somebody's giving you aid, they're going to make sure they're going to get a 1.5, or 1.5 times to 2 times more than what they've given. In other words, I've been listening to Dambisa Moyo for even before she had her book back in 09. I've been listening to her for over 20 years. And, of course, she, paints some broad strokes, as most so-called quote unquote economists. Because remember, if you are quote unquote indoctrinated, or what folks call educated in Western economics, then therefore you're going to speak with their frame of reference. I speak from a frame of reference that's more holistic, because I have to also look at the economists in the street. We just call them drug dealers. So the thing is I have to ask, about this so-called aid, what is that? What is the reason? Somebody's going to give you something because they're going to be going ahead and taking more from you than you have to give. It's almost like what I call a permanent Band-Aid. As a 2-year-old, you might have cut your hand and you say, Mommy, I need a Band-Aid. But then mommy's going to make excuses for you to have that Band-Aid until you're the age of 50. So therefore, you're always going to be beholden to mommy. And so the thing is in terms of aid, yes, it is bad, clearly, because I have to ask, what have we done as African people on the globe? And I'm talking around. You've got aid called Section 8. You've got aid called, SNAP. You've got aid. There's all kinds of forms of quote unquote aid, no matter where it is. And it's not just centered on the African people. You have Argentina and what they've been doing for the last 60 years. You've got all kinds of other nations. But I have to say, what have we done with so-called aid to make us not need it ever again? And clearly you could see the result, because this conversation would not be had if we had used the result like other nations, like, shall we say, India or China, or it doesn't matter. We could throw a stone, South Korea, you name it. They have used that weapon lesson as a tool, excuse me. They've used it, and therefore they've weaned themselves off of most of the dependency of the individual that gave them so-called aid in the first place. Remember, Black folks in the United States alone had the velocity of money going through their hands in the 90s. There was more than Korea and India combined. The velocity of money, how much capital went through your hands, and not just aid. But clearly somebody else has done more with it than even so-called African pleaders, I call them pleaders, not leaders, on the continent, or African people that live in the United States that call themselves African Americans. So clearly, it's not just the fact of, is aid bad? Clearly, what we have done with it has not been to our benefit to never use it again. So the thing is one must ask themselves, how can you go ahead and solve this problem? Which is, of course, Dambisa Moyo and other economists are telling you the problem, but the solutions are right in front of your face. It's what you do with it that matters. It's what you do to make yourself more sovereign that matters. In other words, and I've set out an 8-point plan, but we'll get to that one day and maybe in another live stream, but I'll give you a few of the points. 1, you nationalize. 2, you set up, you have subsidiaries or subsidize yourselves. You subsidize yourselves no matter where you are on this planet. African people don't do that. Clearly, if they're buying Johnny Walker, as our previous guest said, and good cigars and Beamers and everything else, clearly they are not subsidizing themselves. They are subsidizing the folks that made those products for them to consume. So there's other things. There's other different points that we could do. Protectionism, econo-ethnic protectionism. There's a lot of things that Africans can do. So therefore, this question would be moot. Because I'm pretty sure China's not asking the same question, or at least at this late stage of the game, or India, or even nascent upstarts like Pakistan and Afghanistan and Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. And, I could throw a rock around the globe, and I'm almost sure that they would not be asking this kind of question that Africans have been asking for over 60 years, because it's not just Dambisa Moyo who asks this. I've been hearing this probably since the early 70s. So it's definitely aid has proven itself, not just because of the one who gives it, but the one who actually is supposed to use it for their own benefit. Clearly, it has not done us a favor. I'll pass the mic.
Appreciate that, MG2. Let me hear from Cheryl next. Cheryl, what say you?
Yeah, I think what everybody was saying about, what Jackadero was saying, obviously, he has firsthand knowledge about aid and what it has done in Africa. So you can't discredit that. The aid it's not helpful. It creates dependency. It's like the young lady was saying in the video, you can't get no long-term growth by just getting aid from other countries. But I think after, let's say a country, any given country, a country particularly in Africa, were to stop getting aid and stop being dependent on, foreign aid and everything like that, the next step also would be to, I think Ditso said something about it, about being, the colonization, but a little bit more in depth about that. How do I say this? I guess like the execution of it, because even after the aid, the aid is, stopping, and let's say you do get long-term growth and all of that, you're still in you still have white or Arab ideology. So all of these so-called corrupt leaders, anytime you ask, go to the continent and say, hey, what's wrong with this part of Africa? What's going on? People always say, well, our government this, our government is corrupt this. All governments are corrupt. Okay. But where is the revolution? You cannot have a revolution if you have a Christian mindset, if you have an Islamic mindset, you're always going to be thinking that you need to rely on the West and on the Middle East and all these other places. Nothing's going to change, because so America's a little different because America's a white country, right? That country does not belong to us as Black people, right? But when you're going to Africa, Africa is the most resource-rich continent on the planet. So when you're asking people, well, how come, Africa's beautiful? Why not go back to Africa and have a revolution? Why not build this? Why not build that? And people say, well, it's because of my government. The government is corrupt. Well, we have to focus on systems and ideology, because that they're pulling from Christian ideology. And who cares about what all these people say about how Christianity came from Africa? That's bull, because you are following the framework of white Christianity, and you're following Islam. So you're learning their languages first. Just like this woman in the video. I'm sure she's a nice woman. She has some great points about capitalism and growth, but in terms of speaking her language first, and that goes for all of us, speaking our African languages first, doing, practicing our own spiritual systems. It starts there. If you're not doing that, you're in a never-ending system of doing what they want you to do. So I mean, it's just really that simple.
Hold on, I really wanted to tune into that.
Let's welcome in our brother. You're gonna have to be brief because I have other panels to get to. So go ahead.
Short and concise. Why did she use the word colonization? There's a word that describes all that she's speaking of. It's called colonization, and the impacts of colonization and the cross-cultural manifestations of that particular colonization. She said all that without saying absolutely nothing. And that's something that really bothered me when I spoke with her. And I think I said this to her in the same sense. Again.
Yeah, but you have to be specific when you say colonization, because most people, when they hear colonization, they just hear black people being conquered by white people. You need to get rid of their languages. The reason why these governments in Africa are the way that they are is because they practice Christianity, they practice Islam. You have to be specific with people. And yes, we all know it's colonization. I think I even gave some props to you on that. And I said, yeah, it is colonization. But how is it colonization? We need to know specifics, because people don't really understand what colonization is. They just know it's white people bad, black people are subjugated by white people. That's all they know. They don't understand that.
I always did. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. What I always, for me, it's easy because it's part of what I dedicated all my adult life in studying. So for me to speak to a white North American U.S. citizen and using that word colonization, I just turn around and say, gee, how interesting is that if I mention 1776, you are going to feel proud. Didn't your own people fight against the British to become independent? So even the white man came to the realization that fuck the kings, fuck the church, and fuck everybody else. So I get what you're saying, but at the same time, let's speak clearly. Out of the last 534 years of history, within the last 200 and 250 years, the world, especially from the Western Hemisphere where we started, said we don't want your kings to Europe, we don't want your religion, and we don't want anything else to do with you. We want to be free. But in the case of the United States, that meant, oh yeah, and by the way, we're going to keep the slaves for at least 90 more years until we go to a civil war and kill each other off. Whoops, type of thing. That's what deconstructing and understanding the history refers to, that nuance. So how can we fight against the white man when, even if we're learning their own education system, we're unable to deconstruct it and reform it to what it has to be?
Well, I think the question is aid killing Africa? I was just explaining specifically what else other than aid, like Jacadero so eloquently presented, was killing Africa. I was just extending upon that. So I'm going on based off the question.
Let's welcome.
I get it.
Go back, gentlemen. How are you this week?
I'm good, Koku. I'm good. I'm gonna try to be brief. I'm gonna try to be brief. I know you're on subject too. Is it killing Africa? Yeah. It's like overfeeding something. You know what I'm saying? That doesn't need to be fed. You know what I'm saying? What it needs to be feeded at that time. I mean, it's just. I mean, a lot of a point of, you know what I'm saying, the people in Africa who are a lot of the people who's given aid, a lot of the nations are the same nations that through corporations, business, you know what I'm saying, transactions, extracting and having that pull from the Africans on the ground that are incentivized to give away the resources at rock bottom prices just to facilitate the whole chain. And the nature of the fact of it is, if those people weren't compelled to give their precious resources hand over fist at such a low price, we wouldn't have it. I mean, you can't just give aid. You have to stop the whole process. I mean, if you want it, come direct, give a proper price. And then, you know what I'm saying, this market that y'all talk about, you know what I'm saying, around the world where prices is averaged out, you know what I'm saying, we'll come across what people feel it is. And, you know what I'm saying, we'll come to a proper price, grounded in objective, subjective, actual tendencies that are, that are actual. And yeah, I mean, you just can't give people a little bit of money. That's welfare. I mean, it's just like what happens when people don't. I mean, it's messed up that Black people don't have the resources to actually buy a house. But if you can kind of just give them a little bit of give them a little bit of welfare, they'll stay in the little government houses. You know what I'm saying? They'll be small. So aid it kills the mind. It kills innovation, just ingenuity. And at some point, either you're going to come correct, or, you know what I'm saying, it's just, it's always a sham to where you're just exploiting. That's all I got to say.
Appreciate that, RBG. Let me hear from Black Steel next. Black Steel, are you there still, or?
No, I'm still here. I already went.
Get preoccupied.
No, I already went. Remember, I was the first one you called on.
Okay. My bad. Juana, what's it?
Yes, sir. So for this particular prompt, I'm gonna keep my powder dry until the next prompt, because the next prompt goes more into detail, because this was a particularly short prompt, and I really wanted to provide triggers to get the benefit of this whole economic discussion that we had prior. But I would say this, to Ditto's point, I think it's a little bit unfair. I think it's unfair to say because she was trained in the West, that means she would have a Western mindset, or even a colonial one. And you didn't say that, but a Western mindset. Because Kwame Nkrumah had the benefit of a Western education. You know, he went to an American school, and he when he went back to Ghana, he didn't practice American politics to try to create a free, independent Ghana. He practiced what he practiced. And Mugabe was one of the most educated, you know, African presidents. In fact, he went to the University of London. I think he had a program at the University of London. You know, he was a Western trained individual as well. But you see, Mugabe was completely anti-colonial, completely. And Mia Motley was a lady. She went to the School of Economics in London. You know, I am the beneficiary of an American education and a British legal education. You know, but my Bible is a philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey. That's my Bible. So it's not a necessarily equivalent to say because you train in the West that you're gonna come out thinking like a English speaking automaton. You know, that ain't really fair. I don't think that's fair. But I wanted to keep my powder dry because I wanted to wait until the next part. But I will also say this to the brother MG2. I am very skeptical. Brother, of nationalization. I am skeptical of that for this reason. I think that the governments need to govern, but businessmen, independent businessmen, need to be independent businessmen, free of government interference and influence. You know, because governments don't know how to run private enterprise. And if you look at the United States, and I ain't saying the United States is the end all and be all, but the United States was able to achieve a lot of the economic achievement kind of like through the entrepreneurs and business people. You have to let the people them do their thing in the markets without that nationalization or some government official come and say, you need to run the government this way. I don't like that. But that's just me. But I wanted to keep my powder dry really until the next prompt, which further goes into more detail in terms of this aid and the economics of the African governments. I wanted to keep my powder dry until then. So I'll leave it there.
So real quickly. First,
appreciate that.
There's no such thing as the West. Let's make that clear. Starting from that point, yeah, there is a problem already with the premise itself. There's no such thing as a monolithic Western education. What they are within what people mislabel as quote unquote the West, there are Anglo education, and then there's Francophone or Spanish phone type of educations that do vary from each other in certain aspects. This whole monolithic view of quote unquote the West is a farce. It doesn't exist. So what I'm criticizing or what I'm putting forward is not this oversimplistic stereotypes of definition, but more into depth as it is. So as we enter this next level that I'm expecting is going to go more into depth, I will perhaps delve more into that. But that's a point I think it's misunderstood as in regards to this, because I myself have been educated here in the Western Hemisphere. I went to middle school and high school, both in Latin America and the United States. I finished my higher education both in the United States and in Latin America. So my specialization of law, philology or philologia, sociology, anthropology, etc. All those things I studied. I had the advantage.
You got line you're playing, bro.
Yeah, I had the not advantage. That's the wrong word. I had the benefit of balancing Anglo education Spanish education and Francophone education, and realizing where the faults were and where the benefits were, and evolve from that. That's what I wanted to establish.
Appreciate that. Does anyone have any last thoughts on this prompt, as we're going to go to a kind of connected prompt next that Juan would have alluded to? But does anyone have any last thoughts on this prompt?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Let's shoot a breeze.
I'm loving this conversation, especially when the young sister was talking about colonization, and the young brother talking about colonization and Muslim. We could get into religions forever, but I have to ask myself, I just did some projections in terms of economic growth from different countries and compared that to African people globally. And Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim population, their economic growth, they're set to within a few years hit double digit. So I'm not saying it's because they're Muslim or not. It's just that maybe there's a chasm between what the colonizers, because Muslims, they were colonized by those who were in that quote unquote religion. So clearly there might be a chasm between their religion and actually their functioning as a nation to have projected growth. I also did the actual projections on South Korea, which has a significant Christian and that was not something that was indigenous to them. That was, of course, colonized, and they were indoctrinated. Their projected growth, even though that there are some slowdowns coming in the next years for most, they're also, within probably a decade or so, a double-digit growth in terms of their economic standing. And we're using European, i.e. economic standards. Again, that's their frame of reference in terms of GDP. So clearly, they have found a way, or maybe not, who knows, of being able to have that chasm between their colonizing, i.e. in forms of religion, and how they function as a nation. I have run those same simulated models with Black folks globally, both locally and diasporas. We're talking, as a collective diaspora, which is those that are not in the African continent. And I also ran the same projected growth with the African continent. Of course, these are very thumbnail sketches, but there's actually economic slowdown. Although there's a population growth, but economic slowdown. So clearly, there might not be as much of a chasm between what we believe in, whether it's religious or whatever colonizers did, and how we function as Black folk. So clearly, there is data out there that says that irrespective of the colonizing religions, whatever, we are definitely working backwards as Black people globally in terms of being able to compete against other nations. In terms of, and I love the conversation in terms of Western not being a monolith, and that definitely is something that is a very valid point. But I also have to ask myself, and there's that qualification of the word "but." The whole world is unfortunately based its survival mechanism, its culture, i.e., survival mechanism, on this possibly not monolith, but we call it dollar-based or treasury-based or hegemonic, sovereign or what we call seigniorage, that is based upon what I would call Anglo or Western or European frame of reference. In other words, unless you have their so-called economy, you don't eat, and that's globally. With little nations that are trying to break away, and some that might have not been in there in the first place, like the North Sentinel Islands and whatnot. But unfortunately, whether they are monolith or not, we are definitely living the effects of their hegemony. Here's a good, clear case of that evidence. What language are we all not speaking, but what language do we all understand? You could call it Anglo, you could call it Western model, whatever else, but clearly we're not speaking Twi on this live stream. So I just wanted to go ahead and put that out there for you. I'll pass the mic.
Appreciate that, MG2. Shooter Breeze topic number 3 says,